I'm Susie Welch. I teach sociology and social work.
And I'm Vivian Aubuchon. I am professor of biology. We would like to begin by recognizing the Jefferson College Library and the Jefferson College Foundation, who have helped to sponsor today's event. We offer a tremendous thanks to Lisa Pritchard, director of the Jefferson College Library, for her support in her creation of the LibGuide on today's topic. Our library page, you can find more information about the area of contamination in Westlake and Coldwater Creek, the history of the Manhattan Project, the EPA and Superfund sites, and much more. So please visit our LibGuide. Thank you to Sarah Lasford for her artwork and her graphic design, and also to our graphic design and marketing departments. And thank you to Matt Keeney for recording this afternoon's presentation. We do ask that you silence your cell phones before the introductions.
It's with great admiration that we welcome our guests to Jefferson College campus today, Dawn Chapman and Karen Nickel of Just Moms STL. To paraphrase writer Jenna Clark, Karen and Dawn will tell you that they are just moms, but you shouldn't believe them. In their community of Westlake, Missouri, these two moms have led the battle against nearby nuclear waste. You'll also meet two other advocates that are with them today. Ashley is over here, and Kristen is up here as well, so we'll hear from them as well. From their kitchen tables to the halls of the Capitol, our speakers have worked tirelessly for recognition of this injustice and to hold officials responsible for addressing the nuclear waste that threatens the health of their community. We'll learn of their efforts and experiences as leaders and advocates for their families, the community, the state, and the nation. And as we hear Dawn and Karen share their journey and update us on where things stand now, they'll answer our questions, but perhaps the most important question they will answer is, what can we do? Please join me in welcoming our guests, Dawn and Karen, Ashley and Kristen.
Hi, I'm Karen Nickel. That's Dawn Chapman. I guess first of all, we would like to know how many of you have seen the documentary Atomic Homefront? So most of them. Okay. So for those of you that have not, we will go ahead and give just a brief history, so you will kind of get caught up on what has happened at the sites in St. Louis and St. Charles County. I grew up in Hazelwood. I was exposed to the creek. I am sick. I have 4 children, 5 grandchildren, and I have a 5-year-old granddaughter who was born with a mass on her ovary, had to be surgically removed when she was 3 weeks old. I myself have several autoimmune diseases. I have lupus. In my research, I found that several other women on my street also had lupus. When I went back in 2012 when I learned about this issue, and my parents had no idea that they had moved their family into a home in 1973, that the neighborhood was potentially contaminated with radioactive waste materials from the Manhattan Project, from specifically Coldwater Creek, flooding up into our neighborhood. In Atomic Homefront, you will have seen a park, St. Sin Park, that was contaminated by radioactive material. That was the park that I grew up in, played in, and I met Dawn Chapman in 2013. We've been together ever since. And I'm going to let Dawn talk a little bit about who she is, and then we're going to jump right into the history. We're going to do a short presentation. We are very informal. We're going to questions, answers, everything. Discussion, comments. You can ask what you want. We've heard it all. We're not afraid of questions. So I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself, and then we'll get started.
Hello everybody, my name is Dawn Chapman, and Unlike Karen Nickel, I did not grow up in a contaminated neighborhood. I grew up near Rockwood Summit in Benton, Missouri. So it's interesting, we both have this little, she knows, unfortunately, what it's like to learn that everything that she thought growing up, the whole time she was exposed. For me, I didn't have that, so raising my kids next to a site, as you saw in the film, I'm always trying to get back to that, trying to give my kids what I had growing up. So we really balance each other out in our experience. I have 3 children, you saw them in the film, and the film stopped at about 2016 is when we stopped filming, 2015, 2016, and then it showed in 2018. So it has been a long time since then, and we've been really busy. I don't think that we've slowed down one bit. So my story is that in 2013, I was living in a house that I thought would be my forever home, raising my 3 kids. I had been pregnant with all of them in that house. And I learned, due to the odor, I could smell the landfill fire. And I made a phone call to the Department of Natural Resources that changed my life. I learned what was happening at the landfill, which was just 1.5 miles away from my house. And then at the end of that conversation, the individual with the Department of Natural Resources said, well, I hate to tell you this, man, but you've got something else you need to be really worried about at that landfill. We're very concerned. And then he went on to talk about the radioactive waste that honestly is sprinkled throughout this entire St. Louis region, and the origins of it, how it is left over from the Manhattan Project, from World War II, from the bombs that were made. At that point, and I think you'll see throughout this conversation that neither one of us had any idea that St. Louis and this region even played this historical role. We just were flabbergasted in why it's not talked about more. But also, we lived next to a Superfund site. None of us even knew what that meant. What does Superfund mean? Even the word doesn't really sound like a very scary site, does it? It's kind of, but finding that out and finding out everything that had happened throughout this whole region was a shock. And we continue, as she said, to try as best we can with agencies to get proper cleanups, the lowest cleanup levels that we can, and in areas that we can't get cleaned up, to make sure that the public knows where surface material is so that they can avoid those areas and make decisions that are best for them. So we're going to start really quickly. How many people knew or know anything about the Manhattan Project? Does that? Okay, so the Manhattan Project is a top secret project that was the United States government during World War II designing the bombs that were dropped on Japan, our nuclear weapons. So we started that here in St. Louis. This is a picture. I'm actually going to move out of the way because it just occurs to me that my head's in the way. This is downtown Malincrot. That is the Mississippi River. So along the Mississippi River in the early 1940s is when St. Louis was brought uranium ore from the Belgian Congo in Africa, right down our river, right here to Malincrot. This area, Malincrot today, is very contaminated. The Army Corps of Engineers is actually down there cleaning. You can see multiple areas around there, so it didn't just stay on that site. There's actually more acreage contaminated downtown by Malincrot than there is actually on the actual site it happened on. That's how much of it has left the site. That was statistics given to us by the Army Corps of Engineers about 5 months ago at one of their meetings. This is Little Boy. This is one of the bombs that was dropped. Our uranium from St. Louis went into this bomb and was used during World War II. This is Hiroshima Ground Zero. This was after the bomb was dropped. And So we showed you downtown Malincrot. This is a very brief, we will come back to this because there's another slide identical to it. But this is what we call the St. Louis Airport site. And what I want you to understand, just like you saw Malincrot next to the Mississippi, this is Coldwater Creek. This is the headwaters. This is Coldwater Creek actually starts on the other side of the airport. This is where everything, all the radioactive waste from Malincrot ended up being sat. This is the different categories. As you can see, this is an Army Corps of Engineers document. So this is what was sat at the airport that was allowed to leak into Coldwater Creek. The documents we have, which you're welcome to at the end of this, come look through our binder. We have one of many that we brought with us. What?
One of 16.
Yeah, one of 16 binders. We have evidence of this material leaking into Coldwater Creek and that the government knew as early as 1949. So we're happy to share that with you. This is what sat out at the airport. This is what it looked like. Some of it. These are the barrels. As you can see in the back, some of it was just stored raw. There was enough radioactive waste sat out at the airport that could have filled Busch Stadium, just to give you an idea of how much of this sat out and was leaking into the creek. The tree line that you see in the back there, way in the back of that picture, there's a baseball field there that many children in North County played on. That was the Berkeley Quarry League. And McDonnell Douglas, their employees played on that field, Boeing employees. On the other side of that is where Karen grew up, on the other side of those trees. So about half a mile from this site as the crow flies. And we'll get there. This is an up-close image of those barrels. And as you can see, they're corroding, they're leaking. This was known. Some of the waste from the airport was then just moved right around the corner. And at that point, it was emptied from the barrels, and this is what it looked like. It sat out like this in the open. Notice the photograph. Do you notice you can see the rivets from where the rain has rained on them and eroded them? Can you see that? And it's hard to see, I know, but you can see where it's pooling on the ground. This site is even closer to Coldwater Creek than the last one. It's right next to this site. Look, even in the background, this is just one of the many piles. On the other side, see the darker pile in the background? This whole site was covered, and it was out in the open. And for the longest time, there wasn't even a fence around this site. Same with the site with all the barrels. So Coldwater Creek, when you hear about North County and you see that in the movie, this is what leaked in it. We have a document in this binder. I'm happy to show you guys at the end of this. The federal government actually calculated 1984, the federal government calculated how much tonnage of radioactive waste was leaving this site and leaking into the creek. So again, once in 1949, once in 1984, we have documentation from the federal government that they knew. 28 tons a year. That was an actual study that was done. Never once did they jump in the middle and test that creek or warn anybody that lived downstream of where this creek flooded. That waste that you just saw was then illegally dumped. Some of it went to Canyon City, Colorado a little bit, but the rest was dumped at what we call Westlake landfill. Everything outlined in red is Westlake. Westlake is just a few miles from the airport site. So all these sites sit within very close proximity of each other. You'll notice again, look, that's the Missouri River. You see the Missouri River? Every place this waste is sat, guess what they've put it next to? Water. Canals. There's canals that wrap this site. This waste has sat on the surface of Westlake landfill since 1973. So again, these documents, the way it was handled and the leakage, where it's gone, or frankly where they should be testing where it went, has all been known. In the film, you saw the conversation of where's the fire. So the fire is around here. When we talk about Westlake landfill, which is the landfill that's closest to our house, is what you see us talking about in the movie, we view this site as one entire issue. You know, it's got these little areas that are broken up, but if you could peel back the surface, you will see that everything is connected on this site. There is no delineation of where things end. So what's interesting is through the 10 years plus that we've been doing this, almost 10 years plus for Karen, well no, almost 11 years plus for you, 10 years plus for me. The orange areas are areas where the EPA swore up and down, and you can see them in the film, that was the extent of where the radioactive waste was on this site. I keep referring to the documents. Even up to about 2 months ago, we put out 15,000 new pages of documents that nobody had seen before. Even the federal government has not gone back and read its old documents. So what we thought we knew about this site, we'll get to a slide where we talk about what we know, but it has been like pulling teeth working with all the agencies to get them to do the extensive testing they need to do to find out the extent of the problem. Again, this is just an idea of where the underground fire is and where the nuclear waste is. Unfortunately, as you're going to see in the next diagram, the waste is actually down in here. We have been successful in getting them to test a portion of this area, but they won't test the whole thing because it's too close to the fire. When we mention fire underground, understand that this thing has come above the ground many times. We've seen it. This is one example of the fire coming above the ground, coming out of one of the wells. And there's a subdivision right on the other side of this. None of this was ever tested. By the time the agencies got out to test this smoke, they had had it under control. So they don't really know what was in it. Here's another example. We see this when they're doing a well, you'll see smoke come out of it. And obviously we can smell that because there's a lot of emissions coming from this site when this happens. So here's one of our radiation symbols outside of Westlake. Note, so every area that is fenced off on the inside of it is radiation. What do you guys see down here? Water. You see a drainage ditch. That ditch goes straight to the Missouri River. Fast forward to where we are today with Westlake landfill. Every single purple dot you see, we had to fight the EPA to come in and test. And every purple dot you see is where they have found radioactivity across the site. So it's all across Westlake now. There isn't an area that doesn't have radiation in it. All the white dots are areas where they tested and they didn't find it. As you look up here, some of our issues were, did they test enough in this area? There's an awful lot of gaps. Something that we're working on. We were successful in getting the site, the movie ends with not knowing what's going to happen with Westlake landfill. We were successful in getting a cleanup in 2018. However, nothing on this site, according to that cleanup, will be cleaned any deeper than 20 feet. That's the deepest they will remove anything. So all of these dots on here are areas that need to be cleaned up, but if any of these are deeper than 20, they're going to have to remain at this site for eternity. So it's a massive cleanup. It hasn't started yet. As you can, the date on the bottom of this is 2022. So again, and this is the most updated map that we have. Of the 14 pending results, we've now had these come back, and half of them also indicated radioactivity. So
Some offsite.
yeah, and we also know that some of the offsite, you can kind of see the red line around the site. Look at, you can see some outside of that. Several of them outside, including the area you just saw, including this area, now have radioactive waste in them confirmed. So, you know, and our question is, where did it go with the water? But, so I want to go back to this. Where are we with Coldwater Creek? So the Army Corps of Engineers is who is cleaning up Coldwater Creek. And one of the important things to note is that we now have, from the Corps has given us these maps, what we feel to be the most current idea of how extensive the contamination is all up and down Coldwater Creek. It's 14 miles, and you will see on these maps the Corps has removed any locations of any of the homes. But some of this waste is in backyards and has been confirmed since 2015. Karen, I'm going to let you talk about this portion, okay?
So anything that you see in red, those are areas where the Army Corps will have to go in and remediate. Anything that you see in yellow are areas that are still under evaluation, meaning that they took samples, but they still need to go in and take additional samples. Anything in green has been released for unrestricted use. This is only one of 7 maps
Coldwater Creek.
that take you all the way from the airport all the way down to the Missouri River. And I think one of the, first of all, we got these through a FOIA, and it was very shocking to us to see these maps with all the red on them. Because if you listen to the Army Corps in meetings where they come out to the community and update you on cleanup, where they are with the cleanup. They just recently finished testing the whole length of the creek. They have only cleaned up 2 miles of the creek
It's 14 miles.
since they started cleaning in 2006, 7, 8, somewhere around there. So only 2 miles has been cleaned up.
Let me go to the next one.
Yeah. So if you hear them talk about it, they talk like it's really not that big of a deal. You know, they're just going to go in and get it cleaned up. It's small areas. How many of you are aware of the situation that happened at Jana Elementary, where they found radioactive materials in the elementary school, on the elementary school property way up north in Florissant? That happened over the summer, last summer? They recently, after they found the independent scientists came in and did some testing. Army Corps did testing. Army Corps said, oh, it's fine, don't worry, no problem. School district went ahead, closed the school. Army Corps, fast forward to today, is out there right now cleaning up radioactive material that was on the property in the creek bank. So far they have cleaned up 301 truckloads have left the site of radioactive material. They will have cleaned up 900 truckloads.
Just from that one site.
Just from that one small area of that site. Right up there. That's 900 truckloads.
That's just the 2 spots to the left of the creek. All the other stuff to the
Up the top.
Nothing on this
Yeah.
side, everything on that side.
So 900 truckloads full will be cleaned up from just that small little area. Where I grew up, in my neighborhood, the entire length of the subdivision on one side of the street is all red behind the houses, all the way down the creek. And I can guarantee you that no one in my subdivision, my childhood subdivision, not my current, is aware of that. I wasn't aware of that. I was not aware of the fact that for the entire time I lived there, that entire area was above remediation cleanup levels of probably thorium, because that's what we're finding in North County, of levels of thorium. And to me, that's sickening. For all of these years, to leave that sitting there Because whether it is subsurface now, at one point it wasn't. And to put these maps out, it's so heartbreaking to see all of these maps and all the areas of red that still needs to be cleaned up in North County. And the Army Corps isn't really talking about them. And there's so many people in North County that still, to this day, have no idea what's going on. That the areas behind their homes are contaminated. You know, a lot of these are green space areas that these families have access to, that are between their backyard and the creek. And kids go back there all the time, you know? It's sad. This is flooding, July 2022. The area that you see with the radiation symbol signs, that is the Berkeley Quarry Leak that they are still to this day cleaning up since 2005. Car washed into the area that they're cleaning up. Again, more of the same thing.
Those are radiation signs.
That water is all going right back into the creek. This is right across the street from the Laddie Avenue, or from the airport site.
Where you saw the barrels.
Right there under the road, there are, how many picocuries? 58,000 picocuries of thorium still under the road there. It's inaccessible soils. So until they have to dig into that road and make any kind of repair or whatnot, it'll stay there. But all of that is draining right back into the creek. This is still the flood from July of 2022. This is at Lindbergh and Charbonnier. This entire shopping center floods. This is historical flooding here, but still the same. It floods with significant flooding. Coldwater Creek flooding, right here.
It's Coldwater Creek.
This is my childhood neighborhood. What I was telling you behind this house right here, that whole entire area, all behind that house and all the way down to the park, which, I don't know, what do you say, 25 houses?
Yeah.
It is all contaminated.
And they've known since 2015.
And it floods up into these homes, into the main levels of these homes. And what I wanted to tell you about St. Sin Park. In 2015, the Army Corps tested three parks. Two of them were actual parks, the other one is an Archdiocese property. They only tested those parks because of public pressure. They would not have come out of testing the creek to test these parks except that there was public pressure. And when they did, and the results came back, they did find radioactive materials on the park grounds. They said it was all subsurface, it was all under the ground, no worries, you guys are fine, we'll go in, we'll clean it up, it's all good. Well, when they released these maps in March of 2023, we started doing some digging, and the results of those testings that they did in those parks had been put on the Army Corps' website, and they had been there for quite a while. We went back and we pulled all that data, because when the Army Corps released the information about those parks being cleaned up, when they said to a room full of 300 people that they didn't have to worry because it was all subsurface, we went back and looked at that data. It wasn't. It was on the surface of that park. And it had been there for a very long time. And so when we're talking about these documents and the 1949 documents of cleaning out barrels, but they didn't want their workers to clean them out because it was too toxic, and just leave them at the creek and let it wash into the creek, or the 28 tons going into the creek in 1984, and people knew. And you can say, well, that was a long time ago. It's still happening. It's still happening today. That The government knows. There are people out there that know that things are happening. The Army Corps told us we were fine back in 2015, that it was all under the ground, don't worry about it. But that wasn't true. We have the documents, we have the facts, and you know, you have to do your own research. You have to continue to find the data and make sure that what they're telling you coincides with what the facts are. This is all stuff that people are dragging out of their homes, as Kristen and I are going door to door in Florissant, passing out door hangers with some information from the ATSDR, which is the Agency of Toxic Substance and Disease Registry, which is an arm of the CDC, where they have put out a prevention exposure to Coldwater Creek. The CDC says, don't go into the creek. If you do go into the creek, take your shoes off before you go inside. Wipe your animal's paws off. Wash your vegetables off out of your garden. Really, don't even plant a garden. Don't dig in your backyard. These are the recommendations that they have said. Don't get creek soil or creek water in your mouth or open sores. Wash your hands after touching creek. These are all because of potential radioactive materials that have seeped into the creek. The Army Corps disagrees. They do not agree with the other federal agency, Federal Health Agency. There was a health study done by the same federal agency, Federal Health Agency, saying that in their study they found that there were high incidence rates of cancers, and their recommendations were, one of the part of the study was to for exposure pathways. So eating fruit or food out of garden, riding your bicycle because floodwaters would come up on the streets, it would dry, after it would recede, and you were then kicking up thorium and ingesting thorium. I don't know about you, but I was one of those kids that rode their bike, and where in America can you not be a kid and feel safe riding your bicycle? In that ATSDR study, the recommendations are that they will set up a consultation with you and your doctor if you need to discuss these things. Take the fact sheet with you and give it to all of your doctors. These are recommendations coming from a federal health agency. But the Army Corps of Engineers disagrees with that.
Why?
When you have two federal agencies disagreeing with something, it makes it very hard for people to know what the right thing to do is. When you don't have the information to even know what's happening, how do you make decisions that are right for you and your family? The Army Corps does not do any outreach. It's really left to the citizens to do the outreach and to find these things, and to really be the activist and to put the pressures on these agencies to really look and do their jobs. You know, the government has been careless and reckless, and they don't have the 15,000 documents that Dawn and I have read. I think they have them. They haven't read them. I have asked the Army Corps of Engineers to read them on more than one occasion. I think that it should be mandatory that these agencies read these old documents, but they don't, and they don't because they do it by design.
One thing to remember about the Army Corps of Engineers, they are not a public health agency. EPA is, so they follow the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. These agencies have what's called a public health mandate. So they have to follow and take recommendations. The Army Corps does not. And so when you hear her say that there's this disagreement, that's why. Because the Army Corps does not have to.
I want to go back to, and then we'll open it up for questions, to when Dawn and I met. We actually met at an air sampling event that was being hosted by the Missouri Coalition for the Environment across the street from the landfill. And we didn't know each other, although we lived in the same neighborhood, just a couple streets from each other. And we went back to my house, met back at my house, and it was in January. We stood out on my driveway for 3 hours in the cold with no sense to go inside the house, and talking about what we were learning and what I knew versus what she had, found out with whoever she had been talking to. And we learned real quick that the agencies weren't talking to each other. EPA had the radioactivity issue, and the Department of Natural Resources knew about the fire, but they didn't know a whole lot about the fire. And so we were requesting fire data, and within just a couple of weeks, we were actually literally on my living room floor plotting fire data. And I tell you this because, again, no one was doing this. No one was looking at this fire going, oh my God, we have a problem. But we were. We could see that there was a problem. And we were just two moms, knowing that there was an issue. And it's kind of like that, see something, say something. You have to speak up for yourself. My parents did not know about this, and I did. And I knew way back then, at the very beginning, that I was going to go to the ends of the earth to protect my kids, because my parents didn't get that opportunity. And that when I put my kids to bed at night, they would know that I did everything I could to protect them. We really haven't been successful at protecting our kids from the fire. There was a health consultation that came out in 2018 about exposures to the emissions from the fire that said we were harmed. And it was another one of those things where Dawn and I were like fighting the state of Missouri on, tell us, are we being harmed? Tell us. And they had the data. And we were in a meeting and we're sitting around a table and they came to tell us that, yeah, you were being harmed. And Dawn was like, are you telling me we were right all along? And she slammed her hand down on the table and the guy was just like, yeah, Dawn, you were right. And it was like, validation does not feel good, people. It does not feel good.
So much of what we do is not just about getting these sites cleaned up, but what Karen just described. If you don't know how to protect yourself from this, clearly you guys saw, there are recommendations from health agencies if you live next to this creek of things you can do to limit or stop exposure until they can get to it. And what is that when there's basic things that you can do and yet nobody's telling you the problems, so you don't know and you don't do them? That was the same thing with the fire. That's, I think, why we are the way we are, because there were days where I would have kept my kids inside from recess. We were able to look at fire data in days that we called and begged if we were okay, and they have testing results that show that we weren't. And we were denied that opportunity to protect our kids. I might not have let them stand out at the bus stop that morning. I might have decided, you know, I think I'm gonna drive them today. You know, or we might have decided, hey, you know what, it's bad on Friday, maybe we'll spend the night this weekend at the grandparents' house. There were things like that that we feel like we could have done had they only have given us the opportunity to do, as moms, as parents, as individuals, what we all deserve, which is to decide what's an acceptable risk. How much are we allowed as individuals risks to take on our own?
All while we were already being so abused, so emotionally abused.
Yeah.
Our kids were being abused. You know, kids that would have to stand out at the bus stop, but
Would go to a school that was not necessarily so close to where the landfill was, and then they were being made fun of and told they stink, you know, because the odor would just get into your clothes, and it was just awful. And they would be made fun of, and they smell, and you're radioactive, and go, you know, you need to go back to where you came from, and we were hysterical moms, and we were prisoners in our own homes because we couldn't open our windows because the odor was so god awful, and it was just awful.
The last
and
thing
the
that-
state knew this.
Yeah, the state knew. They had real-time data monitors around that landfill. They could have given us a day-to-day. But what I want to leave you with, one of the most important things that we found, again, the Army Corps of Engineers is not a public health agency. Once upon a time, this is back from May 9th, 2002, believe it or not, there were more protective cleanup levels being applied to Coldwater Creek in North County. I'm going to repeat that. There was a time when the federal government was cleaning up Coldwater Creek in North County to more protective levels under the Department of Energy's cleanup plan, and the Army Corps of Engineers changed them and upped them to make them less protective. Listen, although the use of this standard will not result in any immediate risk to human health and environment, it may not be safe for long-term exposures. Example, residential and farming. Why would they do that? Well, we want them to change it back. That's what we're fighting for right now. We want them to do more expansive, and then we want them to work faster to get to the areas where there's still surface level radiation all over in North County. And we also want them to clean them up to these protective levels. Go back to what you were originally doing, because that's what these people deserve. So with that, we're going to open it to questions, discussion. We're not shy. We take a lot of hard questions, so please just, do you want to walk around? Do you have the holder?
No, they took it away.
When you talked about the remediation process, do you know where that soil is being transported to and how it is being transported? Because I know for the Manhattan project, when they transported in open air dump trucks, that's when a lot of the leakage and contamination happens. So are they taking measures to try and eliminate the same exact problem?
That's a great question. So depending on the site, we have some strong critiques with the way that the Army Corps is doing it right now. Again, not a public health agency. We think they could be doing a much better job, but they are storing it and they are putting it in the back of rail cars, and they are sending that out to Idaho. There is a sealed, they are unsealed, crash-tested cars. This is not explosive material, so this is not material that's going to explode upon impact, but it does have to be handled very delicately. It is going to, because the Department of Energy, our federal government made it, it has to go to one of their repositories. You know, Clive, Utah. Or Idaho. But you bring up an ethical question, right? Because we obviously are well aware of the harm that it has caused our community. So what does that mean for us that is going into another? And I can tell you, we joke, but it isn't a joke, that we'll never be able to retire, because when it leaves our community, we truly feel like we're going to have that responsibility to watch it where it goes and make sure that it's handled. And I think that the other point is we get caught in conversations. There are a lot of groups out there that are completely anti-nuclear, right? That all radioactivity is bad, all nuclear anything is bad. We believe that we could probably say that maybe there's not an ideal place on this planet for this material, but there are better options for where it is besides in people's backyards, right? And in a creek and in a landfill next to the Missouri River. And I can also tell you that we have started, and it's something that we will continue to work on with the help of the Missouri Coalition for the Environment and other environmental groups, watching what's going on with their groundwater out there. They have monitoring, they have things, but us being who we are, we're going to have to watch really closely. We're not going to take anyone's word for it. Does that make sense?
I got one back. We had a hand up.
It's more of a comment than really a question. Before coming here, I drove through Herculaneum and to drop off some flyers at the high school. And if I didn't hear about it through my classroom, I would have no idea anything in the area. It didn't seem like anything was wrong. It just seemed like a normal community. So even though it's out there, it's still not noticed. So I just thought I'd share that.
Are you, you're from Herculaneum?
No, I just moved up here to go to Jefferson, but I
Okay.
lived in DeSoto for when I was smaller.
Okay.
So I've been in the area,
The area.
but no, I drove through and just looked around, and you wouldn't have noticed if people didn't say it.
How many of you are aware of Doe Run and Herculaneum and the lead smelter?
Iron County.
Iron County, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, we could have a 3-hour conversation on that one, couldn't we? Love to have that conversation.
So my students know this. I have a loud voice, I don't need a microphone. My students know this. So I grew up in Florissant, Paddock Estates. My husband grew up at St. Ferdinand Park. I had cancer in my 20s. My husband had cancer, still kind of on and off with it. Autoimmune diseases. I have one of my children being tested for autoimmune diseases. But my biggest issue, and so when I was little, let me preface it by saying that my mom said in the 80s, you can't cross the big streets. So what did I do? I got into Coldwater Creek, and I could get anywhere I wanted to. I could go from New Halls Ferry all the way to Bangor Park, just by following the creek. So when I was going through all of this, and I didn't know anything about Coldwater Creek being contaminated until 2009. And this was in the 80s when I lived there. Doctors don't listen, so they immediately write things off. And they say, well, you work in radiation. You're not going to be able to prove where this came from. With my child, it was, did your child ever live at Coldwater Creek? To which I said, well, no, but I had this. Were you pregnant when you lived there? No. Oh, it's not from that. So my question is kind of also a statement. Where do I find doctors that will listen? Because mine have not so far.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry. You're making me tear up a little bit. I have a son that is sick now too with an autoimmune disease, and they're out there, and the good news is they're stepping up, and we are having so many incredible conversations with Chapman, with American Cancer Society. I think that what happens a lot of times with doctors is that they're so busy saving lives, right? They have such a high patient load that even though they might see like, hey, a lot from the zip code or whatnot, they're not always putting it together, and even if they are, they don't know what they can do. So we're trying to engage with universities. It's why we're thrilled to be here, because this is where it happens. Many of you might go on into research and, and I think that especially the radiology department, you guys know through shielding and whatnot, you know that there are precautions you can take. And so the conversations that you guys can have in this are very important. But I think to the most heartbreaking thing, God, it's awful to think that a parent in an attempt to keep her kids safe, to keep her off the main roads, would accidentally, because she didn't know any better, tell her to do something that, yeah. And I think there's a lot of guilt out there. There's a lot of guilty parents who wish they had known. And so anything that we can do to the parents now living there so that they know and they can make the best decisions. But I would say, and if you're interested in those conversations we're having with doctors, and we could absolutely use your help.
I would contact ATSDR and ask them to help you.
Yeah.
And I have a Facebook group that I'm sure you guys know all about it, the Coldwater group.
Yeah.
And no one really seems to know what doctors, where do I go for this?
We can give you a list of some that we have found that are more open. I can only tell you that, my son had to go for an MRI down at Children's, and sitting there waiting for him, a doctor approached me, scared the hell out of me. Because when they're in the machine, the radiologists know, when there's a doctor approaching you and somebody's still in the machine, so my heart just stopped for a minute. He's like, I'm so sorry. He's like, no, your son's doctor. He's like, but I just want you to know we see. We know who you are. And I thought, wow, and thanks for scaring the hell out of me. But they do see it. They are speaking up, and I think we have allies.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah.
The former director of public health, St. Louis County Public Health, did write a letter that you can take to your physicians describing the exposure that you potentially had right along the creek, and just as kind of a call out to them to pay attention to patients. So I'm sure you guys can put it up on the page or on the website.
Yeah, I would
Being written off is horrible.
Yeah, trust me, I'm also a North County and cancer survivor, and I know what you're feeling.
I would take the ATSDR fact sheet and that letter, and we can give you some of our contacts. And I would reach out to ATSDR.
Yeah, because they promise to facilitate a meeting between themselves and your doctor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Lisa from the library, and I have a very library-focused question. I'm a government information librarian, and I was paying attention to the way government documents, both historical and contemporary, have helped you with your research. Certainly been frustrating, but also been illuminating. I would love it for each of you to talk about that a little bit, about your Freedom of Information Act request, how that helped you, and the role that government information played in this journey that you've taken.
Great question.
You should definitely contact Joanna on that data.
So your question is two-part. First of all, I can see you playing a big role going forward because, so these documents, there were 15,000 pages that were gotten as part of the Freedom of Information Act request, and it was extensive and it took them a long time to get it. So, first of all, the way they fulfill these requests, you can request documents from the government, and they have to respond to you within a certain time, but for one that's 15,000 pages, they can take years to trickle that data in. And even then, when you get that data, it's not always in chronological order, right? It's different pieces. So what we were very thankful, we have a local, call her our radioactive godmother, her name is Kay Dry. She lives in University City. And she was able to have her secretary put these documents that were on a thumb drive, print them out, and put them in chronological order in binders so we could read from beginning to end, all the way back to the 1940s, all the way up. So that's the thing, there's a lot of categorizing once you get documents, and even then, there are holes, right? If you read them, well, they're talking about another document that you suddenly realize you don't have, right? So it can lead to another request. But the biggest problem we have is that although we were able to get these documents, and many of these agencies had never seen them before, didn't know they existed, the problem is there are actual documents, hard copies of documents about what happened in St. Louis that are archived, that are sitting in old rusting metal filing cabinets across this country. Because when we did this was top secret. What the government did, we're finding out, is they sent bits and pieces of the documents to different areas, Savannah River, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Hanford. They all have archives. There's one out in California, I can't remember what the name of that one is.
San Bernardino Mountain area.
Probably, yes, and they have an archive there, and some of our stuff is supposedly there. But none of these have ever been scanned. And the people that put them there, right, from the 1940s, 50s, they're dead. They're not alive. They're not working, so they're forgotten about. We actually have documents right now that we have to have a meeting with EPA in the next week because none of the agencies have ever seen them, about other radioactive materials that were in St. Louis. What we're trying to do, something that we know we have to do, and that we'd love to talk to you because we don't know where to start, but with members of Congress's help, we have to get access to these archives and go in there with scanners and get them. Because you can't request documents that the government doesn't know exist. Does that make sense? And what we're finding is we still have, the St. Louis story is not put together yet. We only know, I'd say, less than half of the projects related to radioactive waste that even happened here, leading all the way up through the Cold War. And that's a very scary thought because they all produced waste, and that waste all went different places around here. So, we'd love to talk to you on the side, but that's the limitation. Yes, you can request documents, it's hard to organize them, but you don't know where the ones that they don't have access to are.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick, very, very brief pause because we're very close to 1:15 and don't lose your thought, Susan. We're going to come right to your question, but if there is anybody that needs to go, rather than have it disruptive, I'm going to say you may get ready to go, but first, look, you're going to get 2 applauses today. So let's give a round of applause to our guests. Thank you. And as I'm walking back, if you do need to go, if you've got another class, whatever, please feel free to take an exit while I walk back here and we'll pick up another question.
Is the resistance, I know this is complicated, but is the resistance to taking responsibility and cleaning it up, is it incompetence, is it money, is it nobody, there's not one group in charge for whom it is advantageous to clean it up, is it all of the above, is it, how malicious is it and how incompetent is it?
Good question. That's a great question. That's a really good question. You got to know, though, too, that this is where we struggle, okay? It probably looks like we're swinging a lot at the core, and we are pretty angry with them because there's some information they told us that just wasn't correct. And why? The reason behind that, did they not know? Did somebody misspeak? At some point, we have to be really careful because to be able to do what we do have to keep our anger under check a little bit, and because we have to work with these agencies and try and make them see. So, and I think Karen and I actually give agencies the benefit of the doubt far more than they deserve, given the way they have treated us. But, so I think it is a little of each. And I think that the other problem is that when you look at sites like North County, of which we have documentation of waste getting into Coldwater Creek in 1949, and then we have another study in this book about how many tons are leaking into the creek, and then you argue that Karen's parents didn't know, this lady's parents had no idea. Why? Why? This was a federal study done with taxpayer dollars to say how much waste was leaking from that site a year into that creek. You mean to tell me, this results of this study, you mean to tell me, why not hand it to mayors and schools? You know, and then this creek is just continuing to flood. The photographs that you saw, the people that have grown up, you probably remember it. That creek hops its banks. This is just what happens.
None of our dogs lived more than 2 or 3 years. They all died of cancer. How did the vets not say that part?
You know what I love about vets? I'm going to take a side note because that's a really good point. You know who doesn't have to follow HIPAA? Vets. So the cancer data for all the animals and whatnot, they don't have to follow that. So for anybody that wants to research or wants to kind of veer off a little, because they're seeing it, the vets we're talking to see it, that's a great conversation to have. So, but in answer to your question, it's a little bit of everything. And honestly, it would, and I'm sure they're gonna all watch the video, the agencies. I think the message to the agencies watching is, when we present you with a document that you've never seen before, let's have a conversation. Don't be standoffish about it. You know, if we are bringing you a document you've never seen, it's because we think it's important. Clearly you think it's important. Knock off this PR stuff that's happening in
It's
between.
liability too. They don't
You know, because it's a liability and we recognize that, but we're not involved in litigation. We're looking to lower some cleanup levels and to get some basic information out. So.
What can we do as an average Joe to help support this cause?
We got something that just happened.
So, I don't know what the meeting in this room was previous, but there was actually a representative from a United States senator in this room just a few moments before you all walked in, and a representative for United States Congressman Luetkemeier's office, both of which we work with often. We're all on first name basis, we've got cell phones, who are working closely with us in this, but your university hosting this and them seeing that, that's powerful. That's powerful. So thank you to the people that organized this, because without even realizing it, just the coincidence of today, that just gave us the ability and a little bit more wind at our backs. And anything that makes this process easier for Karen and I means the world to us. So keep doing these things. The other thing is, there are people in this room that have stories. There is a place for you at this table. The elected officials have to hear these personal stories, and it has to, yes, they have to have data, but they have to have the reason behind it. If you don't, this is what happens. So that's the other thing. We will be emailing your professors with what specifically, who we need contact for. We do have legislation, I don't know if you've heard about it, for what's called RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. It is legislation that was written for communities like ours. You know, from downwind of the nuclear testing sites to the processing of ore to the mining. We were never included in that, which is really interesting, because we actually, as a matter of fact, St. Louis have the most acres of contaminated land according in volume in the entire United States of America, right here in St. Louis. That is a we can get you that document. So.
And we get the least amount of money for cleanup.
We do. The least amount of money for cleanup is applied to our sites. And that's got to change. We're not trying to take away from others, but we need more here. So.
Hello. Okay. So basically with the, you said the military and everything, like how they're kind of like turning a blind eye. Do you think for them, over the course that it started in the 1940s, it's basically a didn't see, didn't hear, and then from going on there with this fight and like saying, hey, this needs to be brought to attention, do you think like as those people that had been originally working on it, like you said, they passed away. And then the new generation that has come in to replace them, one isn't educated because again, didn't see, didn't hear. And then it just keeps snowballing that way. And then it's like, it's such a massive project, and even though they're not giving you the right data, because whether they don't know about it, because one, they don't have the proper training, two, they probably have few feet to, that they want to sacrifice to cover that ground and to do that research, because over the years, even the people that have been on that site and have worked it have all had some kind of cancer and have died. And then that adds to your data, and also that they have to probably report that because their employees have to have insurance. And then it's just, again, just getting worse and worse, so it's like, didn't see, didn't hear.
Bring up a really good point. That's a great point.
So one thing Karen and I just said, the first thing you have to know is this was classified. This was a classified project, and actually in many of these documents, they document like spills that happened on Lindbergh. And the response back was, well, you know, we don't want anyone to know what's going on, so just sweep it into the ditch. So what, and you have to imagine that for the number of spills and issues that are documented, how many went undocumented, right? So that created this whole thing where if you spilled it, if you put it somewhere, if it ended up where it didn't need to be, you just didn't say anything because it's classified. Many of these documents, back to the library, and I didn't add this in, many of these were classified and then recently declassified as of the late 90s, even some in the middle of the 2000s. So these were declassified after the decision for how to clean up Coldwater Creek was passed. So you have that. And I think the problem is that because of those spills, now when things happen, the government has to account for that. I mean, surely there was some way to keep people living there safe that didn't also tip off, you know, the world that there was this top secret project. Was really sweeping it into the ditch any different than sweeping it back in the container? You know, that sort of thing? Could we not have dug up the dirt from the ditch right there and, you know, in the middle of the night or whatnot? So I think that the government's faced with what it could have actually done versus what it did. And then I think that it is a liability thing to some extent. You know, the workers that were involved in these spills, some of them didn't even know what they were hauling. They weren't told. It was classified even from some of the workers. So they spilled this thing, they knew they needed to call it in and were told not to clean it. I don't think that they knew, but then later they did come down with cancers and whatnot, and there is a program for them. So I think it's the sum total of everything. Do I think the government is worried about liability? Yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do.
It's always about money.
I think it is about money. I think the other thing is that they have made a lot of people sick and they don't know how sick. One of the things we're pushing for, there is a very big difference depending on, and your radiology folks can talk about it, the type of radiation you are exposed to, an acute exposure in a moment versus a chronic low level of exposure, which is what we're talking about. And namely the alpha particles, which are particles you can ingest and breathe into your lung, which is what we're talking about when we're talking waste. When you get a toxic particle in you, sometimes it leaves, sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't, how does your body react to that the first 2 years, the first 5 years, the first 10, the first 20, and then what happens, right? When you have a particle that could be slowly changing your DNA, what happens when you become pregnant, if you're a female and you pass it on? They don't, you know, they have to go back to the very root exposure if you're the federal government and say, well, we exposed this person then, and then all this happened down their family line because of this one exposure. That's what makes it big.
I also think talking about the being declassified, classified, let's not pretend that St. Louis likes to keep secrets, and municipalities some of them didn't really want this information out there. and St. Louis is one of them. We still struggle with some municipalities when it comes to getting information out about this issue. City of Hazelwood did not want to close St. Sid Park when it was time for the cleanup. They wanted to keep the park open. You saw that in Atomic Homefront. They don't want to hear about it because of, the property values. What's this going to do to my property? Stuff like that. So those are still some battles that are still being fought when it comes to getting this information out.
We've talked, and we can kind of go on this conversation because I'm sure this will lead to more comments. We've talked about, some of the physical consequences, but what about the emotional consequences of growing up in an area that's been contaminated, and then, like Karen with her granddaughter, like me with my son, the weight of that. And a lot of communities, a lot of places, the Army Corps is leaving waste behind. That's there. It's many times background, but it's not quite enough to clean. What does it do to an individual when they're living in an area and taking their kids to school and they're walking on top of the Manhattan Project? Isn't that a form of injustice? I mean,
Bomb waste.
Bomb waste. And so I think that there's a lot of trauma, right, that the government is faced with when it tries to have these conversations that it's not prepared for. Does that make sense? It's not just the physical consequences, it's the trauma. It's the trauma from the parents that didn't know, that told their kids to do something because they thought it was the safer option, and it had this unintended consequence. That they don't know when they're met with that emotional response, and their gut reaction is to just shut down. And especially the Army Corps, those are engineers, and I'm married to one. I say, how do you feel? He said, I'm hungry. They don't know how sometimes to process the emotion, and it doesn't make it okay to dismiss it. Our response is, well, then hire a comms person like most people do that can communicate to humans. But just so we're clear, there's a whole other side to this, emotional and injustice that has happened here that's, we're not, we know exists.
I have a million questions, a million comments. But most, and I wanted to add to that because I know the question that you had, most of you in here know that I am a research nerd and radiology is my thing. But there were, besides St. Louis, there are a lot of different places in the United States that have the same problem, all over the US, where they've done atomic bomb testing, nuclear power plants in places where this nuclear waste has been delivered to. There's also been illegal studies done, one in St. Louis with the Hewitt Sligo building, that the government purposely tested the people in that neighborhood to see how they reacted to radiation during the same time period without their knowledge. So there's a lot of cover-up, and I'm a conspiracy theorist in this aspect, usually not. But even during, for Lisa too, even during the times where people were trying to get some of this documentation during the Clinton administration, there was a big cover-up. Clinton tried to get some of these classified files unclassified, and he could not.
The
Because it went to the
president
Supreme
could
Court.
not.
It went to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that the president could not get these documents unclassified. So there's a lot of information out there that is still being covered up because of the implications that will happen if they are uncovered.
Man, you gotta say that one again for the people in the back, don't you? The President of the United States could not get some of these documents of things that happened in St. Louis unclassified. Let that just weigh in for a minute. So that is, and that speaks to itself, right? Because yeah, we don't have those documents, but what's it mean when he's denied? Well, what, and we can say conspiracy theorist and whatnot, but I gotta tell you, your mind does go places, does it not? So, and that's, we really try not to say people are lying. But
It's hard.
are they telling the complete truth? You know, those experiments were handled by the United States military. So when the military, the same people that now won't hand over the documents saying exactly what they did, when they look at you and they tell you a park is safe and that there's nothing on the surface, and you take their word for it, because why wouldn't you? And then you discover just recently that, wait a minute, this data says it is on the surface. That's a hard thing to process, and that's kind of where we are, and that's, I think, where the North County community is. You know, the same thing with Jana Elementary School, and I want to, because we have a Jana parent here. If somebody goes in, this is just research, if somebody goes in and does a test, right, and another agency comes in and says, well, we're going to come in and do our own, right, and see if this is true or not, what would you say if they refused to do the same test? They did all the other stuff, but they wouldn't do the small little dust swipe test. And we went around and around with the Army Corps and we said, at least repeat the experiment. That's all we want. We just want you to just do what they did. You do that test at other sites. Please just do it here, because we just want, you know. And they refused. They said, well, why would we do that? If we did that, that would be such a small little sample that if it came back positive. And I'm like, you would do it because you're repeating the experiment and you're trying to tell us, is this waste from Coldwater Creek that is now on the surface, that is on the surface of Jana property, is it even in small little amounts getting in the grade school when the kids walk on it? And we couldn't get them to repeat the sample, the type of test that would have given us that information. And that was a very eye-opening experience. So that is why Jana was closed. Jana was closed because even the school district could not get the Army Corps of Engineers to do that simple of a test, to repeat it, to give us a yes or no. And
the school district couldn't even they came out and said they had moved soil from Jana Elementary School to level out their football field at Hazelwood Central High School. They couldn't even get the Army Corps to go over and test that, even though the school district said right out, we moved the soil over there.
About a year ago, a train derailment made a lot of news, carrying, chemicals, radioactive chemicals and things. Is there anything that you think they did right in that aftermath? Because it already got a lot of,
Karen and I,
I'm gonna choke on my candy.
I'm sorry. I'm rusty on that, like it's been a while. So Karen and I actually, through our organization, Just Moms STL, have worked extensively with EPA, honestly, behind the scenes. We've been called in to do some very high-level training with some of the administration and some of the people from other sites that respond to those types of incidents. And the title of the training is Risk Management. And basically it's about how to be honest about risk and make sure that the individuals in the communities you're communicating with have the data to make their own decisions, especially during periods of time when, as EPA, you're waiting for test results to come back because you don't have them yet. What are some things people can do in case they are being exposed during that waiting period, waiting for the data and the science to come back? In case that data comes back and says, yes, people are being exposed, well, then you gave them options to minimize it. And it was very disappointing that they didn't take any of those in that site. I think that there is a point where the EPA and these agencies have to get used to looking at people saying, when a question is asked, saying, we don't know, but we're trying to find out, here's what we're doing to find out, and here's how long we think it will take. And in the process of saying, I don't know, they need to follow it up with, but here are some suggestions we have. That wasn't done, and that's upsetting. I think that we saw that with 9/11 too, did we not? I think that when ordinary people like us are faced with a train derailment in our community or whatnot, some of those people, if they'd have thought there was a chance it was toxic, probably would have just self-evacuated. Many maybe didn't have the ability to do that, but some did. You have to, our response and our communication with agencies is you have to let people make their own decisions. There may be some people along Coldwater Creek that don't want any radioactive waste in their community, you know, and are gonna fight every cleanup until it's down to, you know, complete background. And there may be some that are okay with it as long as their kids aren't on the surface, right? And there's not radon in their basement and they're not growing a garden. But people have the right to know and make their own decisions. And that's, I think, what was denied that community. You know, and I think certainly we all know, we see it with our doctor's office, right? When we give blood or whatnot, that sometimes test results take a while to come in.
Questions?
I'll ask another government.
Okay, that's fine.
That's all right.
Tell me what you think the advantages are of having separate agencies, because it sounds like you've gotten more information that has been helpful to you from certain federal and state and maybe municipal agencies versus others. So tell me what you think about that. And you know, our government is not centralized like it is in many countries, so there's not one central repository for government information. How has that helped you and hindered you?
That's a really good question. Do you remember when Karen was talking about how with the fire in the very beginning, one agency, the Department of Natural Resources, had the fire data and the EPA had the radioactive waste? Well, obviously, that was, while there were two distinct problems with the site, really they were in danger of becoming one, right? And to some extent were one. When you have two different agencies and they only have a piece of the problem, that's what we run into. And a lot of times, and this is something maybe you have an opinion on, because for the life of us, we don't know. We're moms. I mean, you sit together around the table and you make a cup of coffee and you say, who has what, and who needs what, and how do we, but that is very difficult to do. There's a lot of jurisdictional crap that happens, right? And stepping on toes with this agency and this agency. The one thing I will tell you is, for the number of agencies involved, for the life of me, why would we let an agency that doesn't have a public health mandate clean up and be responsible for notifying the community that there's radioactive waste? I don't agree with that. We think that the Environmental Protection Agency should come and slide quietly over the top of all of them, because these are all Superfund sites. And that's their program. Under the law, they're tasked with managing Superfund, the circle of law. So what we'd like to see is them hand it down. But in regards to the documents, you know, when you look through this, I don't think there's any redacted. There might be a few redacted that I can show you in this binder. But it is, how do you know when something's classified? You know, when you're looking at a document about a site, even the agency who's tasked with that site might not have access. Even the president didn't have access. And that is a very scary thought, that they're making decisions with incomplete documents and data. And that's what we feel like is happening here. But as you mentioned, that's happening around the country. The Trinity sites, we were just in Washington, D.C. a week and a half ago with members of the Tularosa Basin and the Navajo Nation, talking about all our different sites together with the Union of Concerned Scientists. The individuals that were 40 miles down from the Trinity site, that ranch has been passed on from generation to generation. They remember that bomb going off and it raining ash. And they remember the Army Corps of engineers coming out and saying, you're fine. and saying, well, thank goodness nobody's drinking the water that it's the rain, when here they are with rain barrels that they handmade collecting rain that they use to irrigate. So I think that the different parts of the Army Corps, the Department of Energy, the EPA, different parts of the government played a role in the Manhattan Project. And I think they all kind of have a little piece of it. And, you know, the biggest thing we're trying to do is see if we can get one agency to just come in and be the one to weigh in. But the first thing that we have to do, going back to your original, we have to get these documents. We have to know what we're missing. You know, if they sprayed radioactive isotopes on that neighborhood, how much, is there stuff we should be testing for that could be still in the ground? You know, I mean, did any of that come from Mallinckrodt? Did it come from the spraying? Who knows? These are things that we have a lot of outstanding questions that we need answers to.
So I have a question. Did you guys ever get compensated for everything that happened at the Hazelnut? I forgot.
That's good for you.
Did you guys get compensated for that?
For what? For what?
The radiation, or like all the cancers and the medical bills and all that stuff? Or like, was there any lawsuit that you guys had?
No, and we'll talk about that for a minute. And I don't want to get into poli sci too much, but a little bit.
So there is ongoing litigation. Karen and I are not part of it. The reason is because at the point where we're getting documents, the lawyers are going to want them and not want anyone else to have them, and we're not about that. We think agencies and everybody needs them. But so there is this thing in the United States of America. It's an act of Congress that was passed called the Price-Anderson Act. You should look it up. It's really horrible. Do you remember Chernobyl? Have you? Okay. So, and 3 Mile Island, right? So in response to those situations, Congress passed an act that if an individual in the United States is exposed to radiation from an accident, from from a plant, or even it applies to this type of waste, compensation and the ability to come back and sue is really tricky. You have to be able to do what's called dose reconstruction. Even if you have it in your home, you have to prove that that's not enough to sue. You have to prove that it's in an amount and it's in a place where you encounter it, you've been exposed, and you have to go through all this stuff just to be able to sue. And even if you win your lawsuit, Congress has to appropriate the money or you don't get any. So it's a really, really tough barrier, if you will. What did you say?
Well, I was just going to tell them about Janet and that we're not involved in a lawsuit.
Yeah, do you want to say that out loud real quick?
So because of how everything happened at Jana Elementary, I'm Ashley Bernal, and I'm the Jana Elementary PTA president, and I guess former PTA president since our school's been closed now for a year. So when all of this came out, there was a lot of concern that Jana Elementary was somehow wrapped up into this lawsuit because of the legal testing. And so how Jana got anywhere involved in that was our desire to get data and information. And then once we had secured it through the Freedom of Information request, we put it out to our community members, we took it to our school board, and those data and maps that we released to the public, because we released them to the public, were also utilized by lawyers. And so there's been a lot of folks that have contracts with the Army Corps of Engineers asserting that Jana Elementary is part of this lawsuit going on, and it's absolutely not true. We have maintained a neutrality similar to keeping with Just Mom's model, is because we want to make sure that we're part of the solution and we can provide documents and information to the public. At this time, nobody in our Jana PTA is part of any sort of lawsuit, although it's being asserted by folks that are in public power that would convolute that conversation. So the school board sought a contract with the lawyers and had them come in and test the school. Our Jana PTA's position was we just want somebody independent to come in and test the school. And since the Army Corps was unwilling at that time to test anywhere near where our kids were going to play, we were just happy to see testing occur at all. But it wasn't until those lawyers came in and tested the school that the Army was at all interested in coming back and testing Jana. And so when we knew that the Army Corps was coming back, we asked, as Dawn talked about, that very apples to apples and oranges to oranges test to occur. We wanted everybody to go in together, collect samples together, exchange them, split them up, and see what we could get. But we could not get the Army Corps of Engineers to cooperate with anyone else. And so for us, that really set the kind of standard of what level of information we were going to be able to glean for the public. And so that really set us steadfast in making sure everything that we got as a community would go immediately out to the public.
So for the same reason, no. But there has been, one of the houses in Spanish Village, I think you remember Robin and Mike Daly, they had 1,000 picocuries of thorium in their kitchen. That has been settled and their house has actually been remediated. But that's that level was kind of, you really can't argue anything near background with that, and especially their proximity. So that was, but they still live next to the site, and obviously they're anxious now for the site to get cleaned up, so that, or to the extent that they can at the landfill.
We should talk about RECA though.
Okay, so back to RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act is also an act of Congress, and it's through that there is compensation. It did pass the Senate with 61 votes. We are really hoping we have a Speaker of the House today that can push it through the House if it stays, and that maybe if we're lucky enough and it gets up to the presidents, we could be included in that. That would give people that have been exposed some compensation. The most important part of that, though, is it's an either or. They could choose compensation, or they could choose to have their medical bills reimbursed if they have one of the list of cancers or illnesses on that list. But what that is it's a way, basically it's the federal government. After you do that, you can't come back and sue. So even that's very complicated. Does anybody else have any discussion? Yes.
So if, like you said, like there was flooding with Coldwater Creek, with that you said it led and has gotten into the Mississippi River. Is there any kind of, they're gonna probably drag their feet on it. I'm trying to predict how far that could travel, like not just Missouri, obviously the Mississippi River goes farther than that, and how far that could contaminate, or are they not, because I know they're so focused on the one area and even just trying to drag their feet on giving information about what has been contaminated on land and with the creek and stuff like that, that they're probably not going to go that far in depth, given that they're like, hey, long-term effects, no big deal, because I'm probably not going to be around when all those results come. So again, didn't see, didn't hear.
So yeah, actually, this is kind of yucky too, but we know in the documents,
So Malincrot downtown next to the Mississippi River did have a permit and did discharge radioactive waste straight into the river. We know it's in Coldwater Creek. We have a study in here from 1986, right? 1846, getting it confused. That says that it's leaving at 28 tons a year from the Laddie Avenue site into Coldwater Creek. There are formulas, right? There are, depending on the current and the weight of the particle or whatnot, how far it can go. There are things like that could be done, and then based on those is where you would test. No testings occurred in the Mississippi River. I don't think that we even know even a fourth of what was put in the river to even do the testing. So we're still waiting for some of those documents and whatnot. What we'd like to see happen, when they're testing Coldwater Creek, they've just about tested the whole creek now. What made sense to us is even back in 2015 and early on, we were hoping that in addition to them walking down the creek, right, doing their testing, that they would go ahead and go to the mouth of where Coldwater Creek meets the Missouri and test that area. I don't see any reason why they couldn't have done both at the same time. And gotten an idea, okay, so is it there or not, did it get there, and then start working out where it could have gone. But we're not even to that point yet. We're still doing this very slow thing, and that's the frustrating thing with the federal government. It very much sometimes feels like they're scared to know if it's already hit the river. I don't know if you're aware, so when the Missouri River comes out and meets the Mississippi, if you look on a map, it's very interesting because you've got the water intake and the chain of rocks. You can actually see the Missouri River water and how it's not quite mixed in yet with the Mississippi, you know, especially during a rain. You can see the difference in the color of the water and where it goes. So very much a lot of the water during certain times of the year that the city of St. Louis pulls in there and drinks is Missouri River water, even though it's collected along the Mississippi. So we've always kind of maintained this, you really need to test that area. Now, let me just touch on water real quick because I know that was a little scary. If you wanted to, you could definitely ask what you're drinking and look at it. Missouri American Water does put those reports out. We are not drinking anything currently that's above what's called the maximum contamination level. So water goes in, it's filtered, a lot of stuff happens to it, and then it comes out your faucet. But that doesn't mean that what they get in necessarily doesn't have stuff in it. It just means that they are able to filter it out. And there is a bit of yucky stuff that you're allowed to drink in your water that might surprise you. So we always kind of tell people, water's a tough thing. You know, what is it, 50 is uranium, I think, in the drinking water. 50 is the maximum contamination level. So anyway, yeah, they can test. We're hoping they do that, but I think they're afraid of it.
Anybody else have?
I think that you could explain maybe or give some perspective to our audience on why families like who just had their house remediated or families are deciding to continue to stay and live in these areas even with knowing that information, families that are from Jana, etc.
Remediation is very, very expensive, so that's an issue. We're asked all the time, why don't you move? Well, that's also very expensive. Some of our families have lost children, and they have told us that they would never leave that area where they've lost their children. Especially where they've buried their children in the community. That's hard. Some of our children have IEPs, individual education programs, in our school district, and moving children with those can sometimes be difficult. For me, my adult children all live in the same area that I do, and they can't afford to move, and I'm not leaving my kids. We'll just all go down together, I guess. And where would I go? Is it 55 million that live next to 3 miles? Within 3 miles. 55 million people live within 3 miles of a Superfund site. It's, after living through this, it's really hard to even have the energy to look for somewhere else to live, knowing what you know. And if we were to move, we wouldn't be able to fight this fight because we need to stay where we are in order to have access to our congressional delegation, because that's where we can make a difference here. So that's why we stay. We stay to fight. I started this fight to protect my kids, but I'm still in this fight to protect a lot of other kids, a whole community worth of kids. And I made a lot of good friends through this fight, and a lot of people that we care a lot about, that we would never turn our backs on now. So for us, that's why we stay.
Can I add a comment?
Mhm.
So my grandmother's house is on Coldwater Creek, and when she passed away and we sold it, it was worth $56,000. Where can you go buy a house for $56,000?
That's a very.
That too.
She couldn't have afforded to leave if she wanted to.
Well, and I did move. I will tell you, if you saw Atomic Homefront, that was my house on that film, and I didn't know it was going to be. So I felt like I had no option but to get out of there because I didn't want the world knowing where I lived. My house was pretty identifiable in the neighborhood, but I could not afford to leave far from this area, and the areas that I was economically looking that I could afford were all near these sites. But the other thing, to your point, and to her point, I was pregnant with all of my children in that house. I could move to Arizona and my son still would have gotten sick. So that's the dilemma. You cannot this is a very exposure to radioactive waste. You cannot outrun your exposure to it, your historical exposure.
No.
Mine followed me.
We did what we could, though, to eliminate it. We did get some rock put on the site. We got things done at our site that stabilized it, that, lowered the emissions that had caused harm historically. We got stuff put on top of radioactive waste that kept it and keeps it from moving around in our community today. That won't hold forever. That is a Band-Aid so that we get to this cleanup. But none of that could we have done if we didn't live here.
So I know it's about time to end. Some of the things that you guys can do that would help us is share Atomic Homefront. You can watch it on YouTube. Keep talking about this issue. Share our Facebook page, our website, justmomsstl.org. Westlake Landfill Facebook, Just Moms STL Facebook. We're on Twitter, Just Moms STL. Keep talking to your friends and family. We will send the professors some contact information for some of your people that you can reach out to that can make a difference on some of the things that we're looking into right now and things that you can contact them on. But you guys can make a difference, and you will, after we put this up on our Facebook page. Just by us doing these types of presentations, it's really important. And it's one of the things we like to do. It's one of our most favorite.
Gives us hope.
Yeah, one of our most favorite things is because us sharing this information with you keeps this issue alive. It keeps the Manhattan Project issue alive because a lot of people don't know about it. So thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it, and it was great.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for leading us and teaching us. I wanted to just mention that anybody who is listening to this can go to our library website. It's jeffco.edu. If you go to library and look for LibGuides, look for the word environment. You can start there, and everything. We'll add links that you guys give us as well. You'll find the pages and ways to communicate there as well as government information that you can access with details about this. So thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you guys again. I can't say that enough.
Thank you.